Hi everybody, my name is Jens Larsen. If you're working on writing more interesting and better chord progressions, then one of the best ways to study this is to check out some reharmonizations. If you kind of compare it to the way that we learn to solo, first you'll learn a lick or you'll learn an arpeggio and it fits on a certain chord, and you'll start thinking about, well, what other places, what other chords can I use this, or how can I change it so it fits other chords? And really that's what you're doing if you're studying reharmonization. So you take a chord progression and see what chords you can change and what kind of sounds you get if you do so. In this video I'm going to take 25 different turnarounds in the key of C major, and then I'm going to go over them. So some of them are going to be fairly standard that you probably know already, and a lot of the other ones are going to be more modern sounding and maybe a little bit more associative and just coming out of the sort of more modern music that I check out. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, about improvising over chord changes, checking out some music theory and finding some interesting chord voicings, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. The ideas that I'm using when I'm reharmonizing in this video are coming out of some material that I also covered in another video that I made about a month ago, about 30 different reharmonizations of a 2-5-1 in the key of C major. So if you don't know that already, then there's a link in the description. You can check it out because there's a lot of information in there and that might be useful and make it easier to understand what's going on in this video. The first turnaround is just going to be the basic diatonic turnaround, so 1, 6, 2, 5, just all using diatonic chords from C major. So and then the first thing you want to change in that is probably to go from having all diatonic chords to changing the A minor into an A7. So that would be this. If you want to add even more movement, because now we've changed the A minor into an A7 that's pulling stronger towards the D minor, we can stop using the C major so it doesn't sound like we're starting sort of what you would call home on the tonic, but we change it to an E minor because then the whole thing is just moving forward, and that would be this. And you can kind of hear the difference when I finally resolve it to a C, that the C is sounding a lot more like home than the E minor. And you can do the same thing by not using the E minor 7, but maybe using a B flat 7, which is the sort of tritone of the E7. That would sound like this. So there's an option as well. And actually you'll find that in a lot of standards you can put this to use, and there are going to be a lot of places if you have a turnaround like this where that's actually going to fit the melody, surprisingly, because the B flat 7 instead of C major seems like quite far away, but because it's moving like this, it's still going to fit. Another thing you can do is that you can start making everything dominance, because that's also going to move everything along. So a variation of that, there are a few different options with tritone substitutions, so not to sort of get completely lost at that. Here I'm going to use E7, E flat 7, D7, and then D flat 7. Then you get this. So that works as well as just something that keeps on moving. And even though I'm looping it, it kind of still works because we still have that sort of pull towards the C. And you can just hear that it finally resolves later, but looping it is still kind of okay. With these first progressions, we're still staying really close to the 1-6-2-5, and mostly what is being used is some diatonic substitution and a bit of tritone substitution and making things dominant. And I have another video where I'm talking about that in a little bit more detail, so if you want to have some more info on that, I'll link to that video as well in the description. Now we can try and look at what happens if we start changing some of the other chords. So the first thing I want to do is to take the D minor, and then, which is also actually diatonic substitution, instead of playing the D minor, I'm going to play an F major chord. And that means that the structure we have now is we have C, and then I need something else to take me to an F chord, and then I'll play a G7 also. And something else is going to be a C7, so now we have this progression. So that's one way of doing that. Another way that we could go from C up to F major is to take an E7. So that could be this. And now that we have that, we can actually also exchange the G7 with some sort of F minor, some sort of 4 minor chord, and B flat 7 might work really well for that, so that could be something like this. And actually this progression, if you know Radiohead, their song Creep is essentially using this progression. It's a little bit different, but they're using triads, so they play C, and then an E chord, F, and then F minor, and then back to C. And that's pretty much the whole song, if I remember correctly. I think it's in another key, but this turnaround is also fairly common, even if you don't see it that often in jazz. You will find it in a lot of other genres. And another one that's quite common in jazz and also in other places is to substitute the 6, so the A minor, with a diminished chord. So in this case it's going to be like an E flat diminished, and that sounds like this. You'll find different variations of this. You will probably know this from songs like Someday My Prince Will Come, or The Song Is You. So it's a fairly common progression, and something that very often happens in the solos, and also you'll see it sometimes used in the theme, is to turn this diminished chord into a minor chord, like this, and then you get this type of progression. Another turnaround that also deserves a mention because it's quite common is the Ladybird Turnaround. So essentially the Ladybird Turnaround is kind of like using Coltrane changes in a turnaround, so that sounds like this. You can explain the Ladybird Turnaround in 2 ways, because you can look at the A flat major 7 and the D flat 7, and then consider the A flat major 7 as being some sort of 4 minor. So this is a subdominant chord in C minor, so it's borrowed from C minor. And the D flat 7 is of course just a G7 with another bass note, so like a G7 altered with a D flat on the bass. So in that way, this is just still a cadence to C, and then the E flat 7 is just an auxiliary dominant. Another way of looking at it is that we have C major, and then we go to E flat 7, which is a tritone substitute for the A, and then instead of going to the D minor that we normally would, we just let it resolve to A flat, and then from there we take the tritone dominant back to the C. In these first 10 examples, we kind of covered a lot of basic things, so we have a few different basic variations on just the 1, 6, 2, 5 with some tritone substitutions. There's been some stuff with like a 1 and then using a 4-5 instead of a 2-5, and also we've had the sharp 4 diminished in there. So now we can start thinking about coming up with some other types of movement and focus on other things than just sort of the basic chord movement that's going to make sense and be functional. And that means that we can use a lot more chromatic passing notes and approach chords and just see what will fit in there. One way to probably do that is to maybe reduce the turnaround a little bit, because of course a 1, 6, 2, 5 is just an embellished version of 1 and then 5. So if you think of it like that, then we can take the 2-5, which is just basically a 5. That means that actually what we're reducing to is just C 1 bar and G7 1 bar. And instead of playing the G7, we can play the tritone 2-5. So that would be, in this case, A flat minor, D flat 7. So now we have a C and then A flat and D flat. And then one way to approach the A flat could be to use a G minor chord. And then we get a progression like this. Another way you can come up with a progression is to reinterpret some of the chords. and then maybe start changing around. So if we take the D minor 7 in the 1-6-2-5 and then just substitute that with a B flat major 7, because that's a D minor triad with a B flat in the bass, then we have like C and then B flat to G7, and in between those two I can add an A flat major 7. That would sound like this. So as you can tell, there are no strict rules, and it's a little bit sort of what I come up with and what I think sounds nice. And I'm not constructing them on the spot, so I'm not really going to go over the ones that don't work. Obviously there are other options, and it's really just what you can think of, and then you want to try it out and see if you like the sound of it. And then maybe there has to be some sort of connection to the original chords that you can sort of think of, okay, this works as this, and then you just fill in the gaps in between in some other way. That's pretty much what's happening here, and that's also what I'm going to continue to do with the other examples. Another variation on this turnaround where I'm using the B flat major 7 as a substitute for the D minor is to use part of the progression from the bridge of the Joe Henderson piece Inner Urge. So here, instead of playing the A flat as a leading chord into the B flat, I'm using an A major chord, and then you get this turnaround. Of course, we can also just start to focus on other things. So basically we have a C in the beginning, and at the ending of the second bar we need a G7 of some sort. And we could start to work with like major thirds as an interval, so we're using different key centers there, and then you get something like this. So the idea with this is, of course, that we're just using the giant steps key centers. So C major, then down in major thirds to A flat, and then to E major. And then from E major, we go to G7, which is actually also sort of a typical Coltrane cycle progression, because you get the E major, G7 to C. Instead of using the dominant to go back, so instead of thinking about it as being C and then G7, we can also start to dress it in a different way, and maybe use one of the other options that we have available to lead back to the 1. So one of those could be the sharp 4 diminished, and the diminished chord itself is probably not that nice as cadence, but the diminished chord also has a few different dominants associated with it, and the sharp 4 diminished in C major is an F sharp diminished, and one of the dominants that is associated with that one would be a B7, and that one works quite well. So we can have C major and then something like an F sharp minor, B7 back to C. And then if we add an F minor, just as a leading chord, then we have this type of turnaround. And the variation on this could also be to just work more with having a nice bass line that leads back to the 1. So if we start on C, and then we still want to use, because the B7 is a nice sort of bass line movement back to the C obviously, so we can use that one, then go down to A flat, B flat 7, B7, and then C, and you get this turnaround. Another way to work from the bass line is to take the one in the opposite direction, so we go from C up to E flat and then just D and then B flat back. And I think the normal way to do this is probably to just make it all dominant chords, but we can also use some different chords just to get some different sounds. So we go from C major to E flat major 7 to like a D sus and then a D flat 7, and that could sound like. Another way you can fill this in is to use the same interval within the 2 bars. So if I take the first bar and go C to A flat, and then in the next bar I'm going to go F to D flat, then I can fill that in with C major, A flat major 7, which kind of seems to be my favorite chord in that place. And then maybe F major 7, and then a D flat 7. We can also focus more on some diatonic third movement and then go from C to A minor and then move. So now we're going down in diatonic thirds, so C, A, and then down to F, and then maybe have an A flat major 7, a sort of a 4 minor chord that we can just turn back to the C. That could be something like this. All the chords in the previous progression were minor 7 or major 7 chords, so there were no dominant chords involved. And we can kind of work with that theme as well, which is something that's quite common in a lot of modern jazz. And one way to do that is we take the turnaround, so just the 1, 6, 2, 5. We're going to keep the C and we'll keep the D minor, but we're going to take the A7 and turn that into a D flat major 7, because then we still have the leading note. And we have some extra, it doesn't really work in A7, but it's still going to lead to the D minor 7. And instead of the, instead of the G7, well, we can't use the B flat 7, that's so dominant, so let's do a B flat major 7. Then you get this. Another way of tying something like that together is to have the same top note in the whole progression. So if we start with the C, then G is sort of an obvious top note to have, and then we can just fill that in and maybe have an E flat major 7, a D major 7, and a D flat major 7 sharp 11. Basically what I'm doing with trying to pick the other chords is that I'm gonna not too often take chords that would already be there. So if I'm going too close to what would normally be there, we're not really going to get the effect of the reharmonization, because it's just going to sound like a normal turnaround. So that's why I'm taking an E flat major 7 and a D flat major 7 instead of dominant chords on those spots, because that's just going to sound like a tritone substitution. So that sounds like this. Another way to come up with a chord progression is to focus on the fact that we have the C major, and then maybe instead of having a G7 we can choose to have a B flat 7, so like a 4 minor chord or a backdoor dominant to go back, and then we're just going to add chords to lead us into the B flat 7, and it doesn't really matter what happens as long as we're going in the right way. One way to do that, so the easy way to do it is probably to have some sort of logical movement towards that, and that could be something like A flat major 7, A minor 7, and then up to B flat. That sounds like this. Instead of having the backdoor dominant, so the B flat 7 as the last chord, we can also use the flat 6, so A flat major 7. And then we have two chords leading into that. And if we start on C major, and then I can just have two dominants, so B flat 7 and A7 leading down to A flat major 7, that then resolves to C. Then we get this. Sometimes you can also get away with having leading chords that resolve in the upper structures. So that's what I use in this last progression. What I'm doing is I have the C major, and then I'm going to an E major chord, so that's kind of like the median relationship again. And then I kind of resolve the E major up to a D minor, which I think works because E major kind of wants to go up to the F major 7 on the D minor. And then from the D minor, I'm moving down to B flat minor chord. That sounds like this. When I'm working on these short vamps and checking out different ways of connecting the chords, then really what I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to expand my vocabulary so that I might not really use this when I'm composing or rearranging, but I'm just aware of some of the progressions that I can then use if I'm trying to come up with an arrangement or if I'm composing a new piece. And really, that's what you should consider this. It's an exercise, it's a way to explore some new ideas. If you have a turnaround that is a reharmonization that I didn't cover here and that's your favorite reharmonization, I'd be really curious to hear it. So please leave a comment with that turnaround and then maybe I'll learn something new as well. If this is the first time you see one of my videos, then please subscribe to my channel. I publish a new lesson every Thursday and I've been doing this for quite some time, so there's already really a lot of material available on my channel. If you want to help me keep making these videos, then please check out my Patreon page. I have a small community of people supporting my videos and helping me keep making these weekly videos for free on YouTube. And if you support me on Patreon, I can give you something in return for your support. That's about it for this week. There's a new lesson on Thursday. Thank you for watching and until next week.